5 sales professionals talk everything from cold calling to closing. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that I'm sure every sales professional has navigated themselves: burnout. Burnout and motivation. Those are two things that I think every professional in any industry honestly battles, especially sales with the ups and downs. So to kick us off and get started, I'm definitely going to throw it to Neil because I think he's our king of motivation over there with Mr. Believe. But we'll start with Neil and we can kind of go around and talk about what does burnout look like for each of us? Because I think, like a lot of things, anxiety, depression, those things all look differently for every person. So maybe, Neil, what does burnout look like for you? How do you know you're getting burnt out?
Well, let's just go back in the old DeLorean. We're going to go back in time here, okay, for everybody. And we'll just paint a picture of when Neil was burned out. All right, because and I think that's how it all started. And I was like, that fear of not being that Neil again is what helps me be the Neil today. And that was the Neil that was, I was weighing in at 240 pounds, and that didn't look great on this frame at all. I got the stretch marks to show it. I won't do it on the podcast today. But I was in a bad place because I was going through a bad breakup. Right? So that emotionally was off. Work wasn't going well because, again, the breakup was there. And then I was going through work, and it wasn't my fault. It was my boss wasn't paying attention to me. And the people weren't buying because they were idiots. And that whole attitude was just spiraling in every area. Right? And because I was just running the same pattern every single day. And why do you think it's going to change? We think 80,000 thoughts. I should have used an odd number because it sounds more realistic, but it's around 80,000 thoughts a day. The problem is 90% of them are the same thought. So I was just running the exact same pattern every day. I woke up, I heard Enrique Iglesias, "I can be your hero, baby." And I wasn't thinking about the girl I was going to get in the future. I was thinking about the girl I lost, right? And then that Pop-Tart sounded a lot better than working out for the day. And then it just kept and then the first customer, do you think I was in a good state at that point? No. And that, if you do that for a week, you're kind of in a little bit of a funk. You do that for a couple of weeks, it's just kind of like, it's just a little bit of like, that's just kind of your mood. You do that for a year in your life, and that becomes your personality. And that's where I was until a good friend of mine took me to the Olive Garden and got me unlimited Red Bulls, and then looked at me and said, "I don't even like hanging out with you anymore. You're not positive. You look terrible." And you're just not fun. And he's still my best friend for a reason, because he just hit me. And pattern interrupted. Changed the whole pattern, started thinking differently, and then started doing things differently, and then just completely turned around. And then, wouldn't you know, I met my wife that year. Wouldn't you know, I got a promotion at work. Wouldn't you know, the things started coming. It's because I started thinking differently. I changed that pattern, and that's what happens. And it's hard. And Eric said this when we got in here. It's hard to disseminate the emotion you have to your day-to-day when you come to professional life, because it just carries over. And so for me, I was burned out because of all the things that were stacking. And if you let outside things beat you down, woo, you're in trouble, especially in Fargo, North Dakota, as we're talking about the weather. Or we talk about the president of the United States. If you think he's going to change your life, you're going to be waiting for a lot longer than 4 more years. Anything outside, I do not let affect me anymore. And I have a really quick refracting time. If something goes bad, I've got 5 minutes. I can be a little cheap for 5 minutes, but that's all I get. Like, my daughter had a problem yesterday. 5 minutes. Let's hear about it. Get over it. Let's go. But you have to switch the pattern. So people are always wondering, like, why is Neil jumping up and down? Why is Neil doing push-ups? Is something great happening? No, something terrible just happened, something bad. But I have to change my state. Because if I go, woe is me, and oh no, this isn't good, and this is bad, there's no way you're getting out of that. So I get myself out by doing something crazy, changing my state, and making sure that burnout doesn't catch up on me. Because if it keeps more and more and more, then that frequency you're running, it's just going to be a terrible frequency. And then you're never going to get what you want. All right, so that's a little picture of a little too much information, but I'm very passionate about this, if you can't notice. The sun's shining on me right now, too.
The sun was passionate about what you were talking about.
It was, yes.
It was just lighting you up. It was
Yeah,
perfect.
it was like, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. When I think about it, maybe I don't think about it as the big events quite as much, although I mean, if I think back at various times in my life, I can totally relate to that. But, when I'm having a, day at work where it's, the grind, if I can sneak out and hit the gym or, go cross country skiing or something for an hour, to me, that's like my reset, right? Like takes, gets away from whatever it is, gets my mind off of it, usually brings me more energy afterwards. I forget what your question even was. I was just talking there, Abby.
We're talking about what burnout looks like for each of us.
Yeah. I mean, burnout to me is usually just, I can't find the energy. I bring quite a bit of energy to what I do, whether it's in the classroom or just at work. But on those days where it's just everything feels like slow motion and I'm tired, that's what it feels like to me. Luckily, I have a day like that, and the next day I feel like I'm usually back to normal. Sometimes I think in if you're an SDR and your role is making 100 calls a day, I think burnout probably looks different than that. And I think that's I had this thought the other day on that, and maybe we can touch on this in a minute, but a lot of people would say that's one of the tougher jobs in sales, and yet it's where we put the newest people. And then the second they're successful in it, we promote them out of the role. And then we wonder why that job's so tough. I think there's an interesting question there too that kind of is related to this.
I think for me, burnout has traditionally or typically been in a scenario, I think, where I'm maybe focusing on the wrong things, or I'm falling into the trap of like, oh, poor me, like, oh, it's out of my control, I can't do anything about it. And I think the way that you can quickly kind of reframe or pivot away from that is, and this aligns really well with a book I'm reading. I don't know if anybody knows who Mel Robbins is, but she's got a podcast, she writes books, and she has a theory, the let them theory. So Neil, obviously you talked about external factors of people and just situations that you have no control over, right, in your life. And it can be very easy to let that impact you. Obviously, hopefully in a positive way, it brings joy, but there's a lot of negativity, right? A lot of things that aren't going to make you feel great, going to put you in a bad, headspace. And her theory is like, hey, I'm going to let them do that. Maybe they don't like me. Maybe they're going to do something I don't agree with, right? Hey, you know what? Let them do it. But then let me react to the situation in a way that I want to present myself, in a way that I have some control over, right? And now all of a sudden you start to, again, have that different perspective. And, when you think about, again, burnout and, hey, it's like this, again, I think kind of historically, this repetition of something that's hard. Like, man, if I can reframe and say, hey, this is, I'm learning things, or, hey, I'm trying new, opportunities, or like, hey, I'm just going to be the best at this job if it's an SDR, kind of reframing has been helpful for me.
It's funny you say that. And when I was thinking about like what burnout looks to me, I was thinking like the short term too, until Neil started talking about it. And then I think we've all probably been in situations where, and if you're a high achiever, which I would say we are, and a lot of high achievers go into sales, right? So can you do that? Yes, I can do that and that and that. And we say yes to everything. And then the expectations that we put on ourselves are sometimes very, very unrealistic. And so usually burnout for me is me being a victim of myself, saying yes to way more things than I should, and then giving myself completely and totally unrealistic expectations. So I think that I've gotten to the point now where I'm a lot nicer to myself than I used to be, but it's real easy for me to walk into that trap, to raise my hand every single time and to commit to more than I can possibly do. And then to give myself unrealistic expectations to do stuff. I mean, who needs sleep, right? I do. I found out I'm not very nice without it. And so like, I really short term have learned kind of to manage that. The external thing is always a big thing. What can I control? What can I not control? Like the things getting really frustrated. This time of year is always hard too. I mean, we're waiting for the sun. It's cold. You can't get out and move around. Physical fitness is big. I know it helps a tremendous amount of us. Before we started, I was just talking about being sore from trying to attempt to get back into the swing of things. But yeah, it's a bit of a roller coaster. And a sales career is tough. You know, there's high expectations, and it's really easy to get on the roller coaster where you're like feeling really good and then you're not feeling really good. And over things you can't. I started telling myself when I lose a deal, which you lose deals all the time if you're good at sales. And if you're not losing deals, you're not playing enough. You need to play enough that you actually are losing too. And if you are writing that, I love my job, I hate my job based on if you're winning or losing, you're not doing it right. You should be asking yourself, did I do everything that I could have? Did I present things right? Did I show up? And if I didn't, did I learn from it? And then that's it. 5 minutes, Neil, I like that a lot. 5 minutes is that's all you should get. 5 minutes, move on, because you can't live in that. The other thing is that you want to know how to suck at sales? Live in that spot. Nobody buys from the guy who's in a funk. It's just, or the gal. It's a recipe for disaster and a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's really important to figure out ways to like get past that quickly.
For sure.
You
I'm
brought
not
up
doing push-ups,
Anna,
though.
Anna, you brought up sleep. It's not sales related, but sleep. That's a hack.
It
You know how
is.
you get more sleep? Don't doom scroll social media.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes, that definitely plays a factor in I think a lot of our sleeping patterns, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I think about burnout, I think about sometimes in my life where I've been burnt out and I don't feel like myself at the root of it. And then I get so frustrated with myself because I don't feel like myself and I am complaining and I'm negative and I'm emotional and I am typically not all those things all the time. And then it kind of spirals because then it's like, oh, why am I doing this to myself? And then you have to try and get yourself out of it. Um, Actually, this brings up a good point that actually today I was listening to a sales trainer and he was telling me that I should, you skip lunch. Don't go out for lunch. Just work through it and really like time block and grind. And that's how you're successful at sales. And I sat back and I thought, I don't think that's how you're successful at sales. I don't think that skipping lunch and grinding for 9 hours straight is what humans are made for. We're not. You are going to burn out when you do that. I, like Eric, like to take a walk every day at lunch when it's not negative 25 out, and get some sunshine, even if it's like 20 degrees out. Like people in my office make fun of me all the time. Why are you going out? It's so cold. Because I'm going to lose it if I don't. I need to move my body and get away from my computer screens. I think that sales professionals need that just as much as any other professional. It doesn't matter that you're in sales. You need to stop and take a break, and that really can help not get to burnout quicker.
I see. Good for you. Sorry, I was just gonna say good for you, Abby, for realizing you do need a lunch. That's I don't agree with that advice at all. You need a lunch. You need to step out, and you're not going to be your best self if you're starving and haven't gotten out of your chair for 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was going to add on to that. There's times we need to grind and have grit in sales. I believe that, right? There's times we have to push through. But if that's your strategy every day, to have to grind 9 hours and skip your lunch, you're doing something wrong. Right? Sales is hard. There's rejection. People are going to say no, and you're not going to win every deal. And I mean, there's ups and downs in sales. But if every day feels like a grind, where it's just fighting through to get through, you're doing something wrong. And you need to take a step back and evaluate that, I think.
Oh, for sure. Have you guys, I don't know if you've seen the social media trend where it's my body doesn't know the difference between being held at gunpoint and like receiving an email, like the fight or flight. Like sometimes people have like fight or flight responses to getting an email and your job shouldn't be fight or flight. It's going to be hard. There's going to be days that you need to grind to get through, but you shouldn't feel fight or flight every single day at your role or you're not going to sell anything. Like you guys said, you're just not going to be that person.
I think the key there is picking the places where you should be more disciplined right? Like we always talk about the consistency, because if you don't want to be on the roller coaster ride, because if you're on the roller coaster ride, then you just are having up and downs and then you are fluctuating. But if you do the consistent things that will make you successful at sales, and we all have to be reminded, not taught, we all know that that's prospecting, following up creatively, doing the things that are, what we say is hard to do, but I always challenge people too. It's like, no, Auschwitz was hard. Slavery was hard. We're just calling some people, right? We just got to reframe that a little bit too. And then the same thing is but if we can stay consistent to those, and those are the things those are standards, like not my boss's standards, not my manager's standards. These are my standards. Like I don't negotiate if I get 10,000 steps in a day. My legs will be broke if I don't get 10,000 steps. I don't negotiate prospecting time. My wife's got to call 2 times, and there's an emergency if I'll pick up the phone call during prospecting times. If we stick to those standards and make that's how I feel good at the end of the day, if I hit my standards, because you do. Because when you do it, you feel like I hit my standards today. I made progress today. That feels great. And they don't have to be lofty. They don't have to be crazy. They just have to be consistent. And and then if you start making that progress, you start winning more. And burnout is when you're not winning. I've never been in a game where I can't miss a 3-pointer. I'm like, hey, take me out. This isn't fun for me anymore. Right? It's because if I can't miss, it's like, this is a lot of fun. Let's keep playing this game. Right? And that's if we can keep doing that, but it's so hard to stay consistent. And that's why it's great to have a leader. And that's what sales manager needs to do, is when you see somebody falling off those consistent daily habits and watching those, you can come in and say, not micromanaging, like, hey, I noticed today you didn't do your callbacks. What's going on there? Because that's great. But it's more, hey, Neil, I got another Neil on the team, so I'm not talking about myself. Hey, dude, you never miss your prospecting. You good? Everything good today? And then he's going to go into, well, this happened. And then we talk a little bit more, and then we find out, and we get back on track. So we make sure tomorrow we don't make it 2 days, 3 days, a month, and then we're on the roller coaster ride again, right? And that's where we are inconsistent. We have to change that pattern. As a leader, you have to switch their pattern up quick. You cannot let it fester, because then it becomes the new normal. And that's where more's caught than taught. So if you're not doing it, then it's really hard to tell someone to do it. That's also the thing. Like I could tell my kids till I'm blue in the face to, stop doing this thing. And then they see dad doing it. Not smart. Right. So it's more's caught than taught. So making sure you're leading by example. But then, that's just so we don't have to be on that roller coaster ride. Because I don't think it can be if we're doing the right things.
One of the things you said that I thought was going to, and I do this too, and I feel bad, but when my grind, I work way more than 40 hours a week. I work all the time. I love working though. And I know what my boundaries are, and I take my lunches and I do my stuff, and it's what I do with my free time because I don't have any hobbies, but I'm going to work on that. But one of the things you were talking about, Neil, was like when your family calls, I think about all the distractions that we have, right? Not just, and I love my family desperately, but if I don't stay focused in what I'm doing, I can't. I can't. So mine have the same deal. Call me, send me a text. As soon as I'm done with what I'm doing, I'll get back to you. And sometimes it'll be after I'm through my time that I block for my calls, for the things that I need to do. It's really important, I think, to be able to draw those boundaries to avoid burnout, because it's really hard to do your job and manage 5,000 other things at the exact same time. And you have to be able to come to work and be at work. And you have to be able to also, when you're at home, say, I'm at home for now, and this is the time I'm committing to being at home and with my family and whatever I'm doing. Having those divides, which is my whole team would probably laugh at me because I work a lot. But I spend my time with my family. I spend my time at work, and I have it worked out so that I'm actually present when I need to be present. And I think that's so hard to do, but it's really important.
I want to go back.
So how do you guys think goals factor into this?
Goals, like going off what Anna was saying, like being present. It's hard to achieve your goals if you're not present at what you're doing, right? Like if you're scatterbrained, right? You've got your friends are texting you, your daughter's calling you, you've got this to go do to the PTO board, and you're trying to make this sale. You're never going to achieve any of those goals. You're not going to be able to deliver at everything 100% if you're dividing your time and not, or if you're not like adequately dividing your time. When you say, okay, for this hour, I'm going to work on this goal and this deal, and I'm going to close it, then your focus is on it. And then you can give your undivided attention to your daughter when she calls next time. And you have to be able to set those boundaries and prioritize. Otherwise, you simply cannot achieve any goals. Things are going to slip through the cracks, and you're just not going to be focused enough.
Did you mean goals or quota, Eric?
Yeah, apparently my internet in my house is having a down day as well. So apologies. But my question was about how goals, personal goals, and they might be goals your manager gave you, or they might be goals you've given yourself. I've always felt that I've had an easier time pushing through and really working hard when I have a goal that I'm really motivated to hit.
100% clarity. You got to be completely clear on what your mission is, right? Like what is the goal? And again, that's where I think we get sometimes, or I did as a manager, wrong, that I thought my goal was their goal. And that the company's goal was their goal, and that lit them up and made them go on fire. But most of the time it doesn't. So it's really finding out what is the goal. And some people, and it doesn't have to be a 5-year goal. What are we just going to try to do this week? Or what is maybe the bigger plan? It's awesome here because I get the salespeople I know long enough that I know one wants to pay his house off in 2 years. Well, then we reverse engineer that, right? This is what it's going to take to do that. And this is how many deals we're going to need a month to do that. So are we on track to make that happen, right? Another person wants to go to Hawaii with the family. Cool. This is how we can make this happen. Like, that's what I think is powerful, because then when you have that mission or that thing that's really driving you, it's easier to make one more call, to your point, Eric, right? And we don't all work for a charity where we get to like, this is helping, make sure children are not abducted, right? That's easier to have that. But so we got to find the thing that we're super clear. And if you ask 10 people right now, like, what is your goal for this year? What are you trying to do? What are you focused on? You would get like, I think, deer in the headlight. And so that makes it really hard to get clear on what I'm going to do today, because this is what my goal is. And this is why I want this.
Yep.
And I think that's, you talk about goals and direction that people have. That could be a whole nother, more long conversation we have. But I think for me, like, and I think I've talked with everybody about, I ran track and field in college, very regimented. Like, you train, of course, you work on, obviously the food you put in your body, the sleep you get at night, and everything is very specific to a goal, right? Hey, I want to win a conference championship. I want to go to nationals. You want to do all these things, right? We'll equate it to, how about you want to train for a marathon? Okay, because that's something I think that a lot of people would resonate with. Here's a big lofty goal. I want to run a marathon, 26.2 miles. Okay. Well, you think you're going to get off of your desk today and go run a marathon? Maybe, but probably not, right? Or if you do it, it's going to suck, right? So then you have to start asking yourself, like, okay, if we're setting goals, like, we need to have a framework, and we need to do the backwards planning, like you said, Neil, of like, okay, let's set up a training plan. Hey, let's relate it back to sales. Well, what's my goals? I want to hit my quota. Okay, well, who do I work with? How many customers do I need to interact with? How many appointments do I need to set? What's my conversion rate, right? And then you go back to like, how can I not get burnt out? Because this is a year-long goal. This is a year-long training plan for a marathon. Well, I have to take the small wins of, hey, yes, I made the prospecting hour today. Hey, you know what? It was a rest day for my marathon. I didn't run today. But hey, you know what? I was supposed to do that as part of the plan, right? And now all of a sudden, it's like, hey, you have these small little wins. So you're constantly like affirming like, hey, this is good. It feels good. I'm dedicated. I'm winning, right? And then when you finally do achieve that big goal, you have excitement and you have gratitude. But then a lot of times, you know what, you find out that all of a sudden you're at a false peak. You're like, oh man, what's the next thing I can do? What's the next thing I can do, right? So then it's all coming down to like, all of a sudden, I love the goals and I love accomplishing the goals, but you know what I really like? It's the process that leads up to all that. That's what I really like, and that's what keeps me going, right? So that's the way I think about it.
Miley got one thing right, guys. It's the climb. The climb. And you know, Kobe said it, everybody said it, but it's going towards it. The question I have is like, because you figure that out after time, because once you get there, you're like, yeah, this wasn't it. The question I have to you guys is, you start doing the things, but you're not having the success right away. And you're 3 months in, and it's the race, right? And you're supposed to be running at this time, and you're not there, but you're doing the things. You feel like you're doing the right things, because that's what sets people back. You know, Anna talked about before we started, like you're trying to get momentum, but you just don't get over that hump. You don't get that experience that changes your belief to make you feel like, oh, I'm enjoying this. This is great. How do you get back on track when it's 3 months and you're just not having success, and you're like, yup, got to change my goal, or this doesn't work. It's not working.
I think you got to have a team. You got to have support around you, like-minded people. You know, I think if you go at it alone, yeah, it's going to be tough, right? But I would say, and again, this goes back to, you know, team sports, athletics. It's, hey, you're on a sales team. You work for a company. You got people around you that are all working towards a similar goal. Now, people are going to have ups and downs, right? Not everybody's always going to be up here, but that's where you step in, you help each other out, right?
I love that, because I think that's the biggest thing with burnout. It's your environment. And if you just keep going to a toxic environment, and again, I always say, stay happy or leave in peace. Because if you keep complaining about how toxic your work environment is, but you've been there for 3 years, I am not sad. I'm not feeling bad for you at that point. Like, what are you doing? Right? Like, go. You'll flourish somewhere else. Or if someone's just holding you accountable, or again, if it's an integrity thing or something. I've seen people do this though. Same thing. Like, if I'm in a bad spot or I need someone to help me, it's probably not best to call mom, because she's just going to agree with me. She's going to be like, oh, sweetie, it's not your fault. You're the greatest. It's like, I'll do that on a different day, right? But we do it. Like, we talk to negative Nancy or lazy Susan. Sorry, Susans and Nancys. But it's the wrong person to be talking to in your environment, right? Don't go talk to the sales rep that's struggling also. To your point, Grant, right? Like, misery loves company. So that's what usually we do. We all go correlate and say, this does suck. Let's get our pitchforks out and say, this is terrible. This isn't going to work. Go find the guy that's doing it. But most of the time we're like, well, if it's easy for him, he gets spoon fed all the leads, and we'll play it. You guys are talking about it. We get in a victim mindset, because it's a lot easier than to look in the mirror and say, it's all my fault. And that's why we need that team. So if you don't have that environment, find it, because you'll become who you surround yourself with. So it's great about getting on this podcast. I'm like, there's really smart people on here. I can't be stupid again today, right? It levels you up. It just does. It starts leveling you up. And so it just, find that right environment and you will flourish. And maybe you're just not in it and you've been scared to step out. Step out. I did it way too long, where I stayed in that flight or flight, Abby, right? Where I'm just like, every day I'm like, oh God, is he going to call me in the office? Am I going to get that email? Are they going to fire me today? And it's like, that's a great place to be. Like, your stress levels to the roof. You can't sleep. Like, no. All right. Sorry.
So as like a sales manager, how do you help your team through that?
It's what Grant pointed. It's the buddy system, right? It's like, we've all gone through it before, and that I don't always have the right answer, and somebody else on the team can kind of pick that person up and walk them through it, and hey, shadow them today a little bit, or this person went, or see what they're doing. Because usually if you're not having success, there's something in your process you're probably not doing quite right. Right? There's something that you need to and we got to put a finger on that and figure out what that is. And so you can get through it, because there's something you're missing, and you'd be surprised like what other people will pick up. So it's like, hey, Brett's going to come with you on your discovery meeting, or I'm going to go with you. You know what? We're riding together all day today. You know what? I'm going with you all day today, and we're going to go, and then you can pick up and see, oh, this is where they're missing. Because again, you want to get someone else's eyes on it, because again, a different perspective can change everything.
I think it's interesting, you know, assuming you're working for the right company, and there's bad ones out there.
Sure.
Maybe not every manager is awesome. Neil's obviously very engaged in doing these great things with his team. I know that there's a lot of great managers out there, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves too. There's been times in my career where I was sitting there and comparing myself to other people, and I shouldn't have been. And sometimes that allows you to settle down into a lower level too. Like, one of the things that always just kind of amazes me is people always measure themselves against the lowest person on the team. Like, as long as you're doing better than the bottom, you're doing okay. Why? Why is that the bar? Shouldn't the top person be that? Like, we're not, a lot of people don't shoot for that top piece. And I just would say that you really need to be honest with yourself. And that means looking yourself in the mirror and saying, okay, I'm not doing as good as I want. You can blame your boss, you can blame the economy, you can blame all sorts of stuff. But if you're not actually honestly saying, if you can't look at yourself and say, I did everything that I was supposed to do, I did time block, I made my calls, I followed up with people, I've been thorough, my communication is good, I'm investing in myself, I'm learning as much as I possibly can, listening to these awesome podcasts so I can get better at my job. Are you investing in yourself? Because if you can't answer yes to all of those things, then start with yourself. You can't fix
it has a
everything
lot
else.
to do with accountability.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, when you get to the end of the year, end of the month, whatever it is, you got this goal in mind and you've got a time, right, that you've set of when you're going to do it. There are times you're not going to reach the goal. You are going to fail, right? And it's in that reflection, then you can look back and you can ask yourself and be honest, did I actually do what I needed to do to make this happen, or no? And if you say no, I didn't do what I needed to do, well, then it's a pretty cut and dry, clear answer, right? And that's, something you got to work through. But if you say yes, like, hey, I really did everything, like, you can feel good about that.
Yeah.
Right? Now you can go and adjust, right? Because of course we want to hit the goal the next time. We learn, we adjust. But you feel a lot better about that, right? Because, hey, sometimes it is out of your control.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just the way it goes. But at least if you can say, hey, you know what, I did what I needed to do. Hey, I feel all right about it. That's the way it goes.
And if you didn't, that's okay too. But make the adjustment. Look back, be honest with yourself. I screwed up last month. I'm not going to do it again this month. Now, if every month you're having the same conversation, you need a new career path. But you're allowed to have an off month. You're allowed to make an adjustment. You're not allowed to have consecutive 12 off months and keep your career probably. But you got to really, if you can look back and say, these are where I'm going to improve, we're all doing that. I mean, all of us. It never stops. One of the things I was thinking about earlier, you're talking about the ups and downs that we have. I don't. It's been probably 5 years, but I've carried this mentality with me for a long time. But I was talking to one of my managers here, and he's like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I was like, it's just one of those days." And he's like, "Well, what's going on?" And I don't even remember what it was, but I started listing the thing that I was upset about, and he said, "Anna, it's a 2." And I was like, "What do you mean it's a 2?" And he goes, "On a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 2." And I was like, you're right, it's totally a 2. And I was upset on a scale that doesn't do that. And I've started like asking people when we're talking, well, is that a 2? And people go, well, yeah, it's a 2. And then they'll give me another 2 and another 2 and another 2. And I'm like, you can't add 2s. They're all 2s. 5 2s don't make a 10. But you have to step back and ask yourself, like, is this a 2 or is this a 10? And I think most of the time, the things that really upset us are a pile of 2s. We don't even get up to a 6 or a 7. We're just adding up our 2s. And that's just such a fruitless exercise.
I like that, Anna, though. I do think that that's true. And I think that we talked about earlier, like falling in love with the process. Like, if you can sit back and say, like, we've all had bad days. Like, wow, today sucked. I wasn't really good on that cold call. And that email that I sent wasn't clear enough. And I should have asked this question instead of just guessing. As long as you can sit back and say, like, you know what? I'm not starving. I have a roof over my head and I have gas in my car and I'm going to eat what I want to eat for dinner tonight. And then I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to go back to work. And I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm going to change what I'm doing. You're still winning. You don't just lose because you had a few 2s in one day. You just adjust and you come back, and that's winning.
And you learn in your bad environments too. That's one of the things you might not have a Neil as a sales manager. I'm sorry for all of you that don't. Lucky to you that do. If you don't have Neil as a sales manager, that doesn't mean that you can't learn in the environment that you're at. That doesn't mean that you can't be gaining experience and trying to figure out how to move through it. But honestly, tough stuff. Life is hard. You're going to have tough bosses and tough customers and tough Take it and get what you can out of the situation. Don't let it beat you up. So I'm going to learn everything I can in this environment, and I'm going to look to improve my environment while I'm at it. But I'm not going to walk out of this empty-handed. Don't let somebody else wreck something for you.
No. And
You
make
know,
sure
I
you
made
have
a
a good.
post on LinkedIn I made a post on LinkedIn this morning about kind of the terminology we use in sales, wins and losses. And I think that sometimes pulls people down too, because,
Yeah.
there's times where we equate a loss in sales to being a failure. But if you lost a deal because you stood your ground and didn't give in to some unreasonable request for a huge discount or other term that you just didn't want to meet, and you lose the deal, that's not failure, right? The failure would have been giving in to something unreasonable to win a deal when and then that would have been a loss. So sometimes the terminology that we use to describe success doesn't help.
100%.
We treat it like it's a basketball game where there's a simple score, and it's more complicated sometimes.
Always.
And Simon Sinek talked about it, and he says it more eloquently than I'm going to right now, but it's an infinite game. You don't stop. The rules don't apply. You keep playing because you want to keep playing the game. You want to keep producing. You got to keep winning, otherwise the game stops. But we never stop. And everything great in life is infinite. It's just like relationships. You don't stop a relationship. You keep playing. You keep getting better and better and better. But it gets harder and harder as we get longer and longer inside of a relationship. When we first start, we always got to talk about relationships here on the podcast. Duh. Like, that's what we do. But when you first start a relationship, you're just, and you're at peak energy, like no burnout there, right? Because you're like, no, you hang up the phone. No, you hang up. No, you hang up, right? Like everybody's in love and everybody's just in this great feeling. You got these dopamine feelings, right? And if someone said, hey, go pick me up a coffee, I'm like, oh, do you want a large mocha frappuccino with extra whip? And then 7 years later, if my wife calls, hey, can you pick me up a coffee in my home? Like, oh my gosh, I'm almost home. Are you kidding me? Like I would like, and it's like, what happened? What changed? And that's where we have to be just more intentional. Grant talked about it. Anna talked about it. We got to be grateful. We got to remember, like, this is the things. And to your point, Anna, it's not always your environment. It's who you're letting go into your mind. My greatest mentors I've never met before. It's creepy. But some of the smartest people now, you can get on a podcast, you can read a book, and you can learn so much from these awesome people that have done it. And then take that and put it into your day to day. And that's what's great is like I said, is just that we have all that right now at our fingertips to prevent that burnout.
Absolutely. So I think the main takeaway is, get outside and go for a walk, maybe go to the gym, and just make sure you're sticking to your goals and your routine, and don't get too hard on yourself, right?
Yeah. And set some goals for yourself too. Some stretch, things that something that motivates you. Know what your why is, right? What are you chasing?
I think with our goals too, give yourself credit when you take a step towards your goal. You don't set realistic goals and then celebrate those tiny wins. Grant, you talked about that. Just like a little success is a success. A move in there. Are you better today than you were yesterday? Okay, keep going. If you can answer that every single day, you're making all the right moves. Or maybe not every day. Even if you can answer that most days, you're making the right moves.
All right. Anything to add, Neil, to wrap it up?
I appreciate you guys. I'm really passionate about this. I think energy is the most important thing. And people think it's time, but I've had time with no energy. And that's not a pretty thing. That is not a pretty thing. And we had a 1 in 300 trillion chance of being here, right? We've won the lottery of life. But every morning we don't act like it. And someone said this once and it hit me of, if I woke up tomorrow and I was at your house, I know, weird, creepy, but I gave you $1 million, how would you act at that situation? You'd be like, oh, you'd be happy, right? It'd be a pretty good day, right? But then if I said, rewind it, hey, you don't get the $1 million if you don't get to wake up. What are you picking? Pretty sure you're picking waking up, but why aren't you more happy then? So just remember that this is an awesome thing, and you should be at the frequency. I had a guy that just lost a sale right before this call, and I said, you got 5 minutes. You got 5 minutes. I want to hear all the reasons why you lost it. I want to hear all the reasons that it happened, right? But then that Neil, his name's Neil again, he has a great frequency about him. He is awesome. So I said, no, I want you to think about that you just won that deal and you just won 3 more deals. That guy right now, the way you're feeling, the way it felt today when you hit that one deal, that's who needs to go to the world tomorrow, because he will sell more deals. And you might miss your biggest opportunity tomorrow because you're stuck on some bad thing that happened in the past. It's in the past. If we look in the rearview mirror, we're going to hit something. You don't care about the past. It's the past. Done. Next. Because you might miss that huge opportunity you have today, but you just got to change that perspective. And that's just, it's so important to me. And I thank you so much for kind of letting me, I kind of hogged it. I will be quiet next week a little bit more, but I really appreciate it, guys, because I'm just so passionate about this. And it's completely changed my life, and for the better.
Thank you for sharing that. Neil, honestly, like, we've all been there. Like, we've all been in those places. And I think the biggest thing that I'm going to go home with, work out, do all those things. But the biggest thing I'm going to take away, and a lot of it came from the story that you shared, is that you get to pick. We've all been in down spots. We've all had tough days. But at the end of the day, it's up to us. It's your choice. You choose what you're going to take, where you're going to go, how you're going to feel about things. And sometimes you need a good friend to point it out to you and say, hey, what's going on with you? Yeah. But at the end of the day, the reason that you snap back is because you chose to. And you choose to over and over and over again. And that doesn't mean you don't have bad days. It just means you choose. You choose to not let it rule you. And so I will take that with me tonight. And I'm grateful you shared your story.
Yeah. And you guys all said it. Stumble, don't fall. You might have a bad day, but don't have a bad week. And then don't have a bad month. You might have a couple stumbles, but then have those standards. To our point, like to Eric's point, your goals, have your things that you can mark that I'm doing the right things every day. And don't negotiate with yourself, because you're way too smart for that. Like, you can't let your feelings get involved with your standards. If your standard is, I'm going to work out today, you don't miss it. It doesn't happen. And if you can continue doing that, like with prospecting, following up, just daily standards, you keep stacking those, man, a year, and then 10 years, you can be a totally different person.
Well, guys, based off of that, I feel like we need to wrap this up because I need to go hit the gym.
Yeah, no kidding.
Me too.
Go.
All right. It was a fun conversation. I look forward to talking to you guys next month.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks.